You all seemed to love hearing me talk about all the books, so I figured I'd make this video about the games too. I'm sure a bunch more games will be dropping later this year, so I figured I'd get this out now and then I could make an updated version once things calm down after that, instead of having to sit on this idea until a bunch of games without release dates drop. Because there are way less of these than there were stories, I'm gonna be going more in depth here. My reviews will be on a scale of 0 to 10, and will be based on 3 factors: gameplay, story, and presentation. Gameplay is by far the most important, so it's worth 7 points. Story is worth 2 points, and good presentation is usually just a nice bonus in games, but it's relevant in horror games, so I'll dedicate 1 point to it. Also, I will be counting updates and DLCs as unique games, except for the 4th game's Halloween update, because it's just a reskin of the base game. And joke games will only be on the list if they're unique instead of being reskins of Scott's older games. And one final rule, I'm specifically judging these games on PC. I won't be talking about any of the ports, just the original versions. I don't have any modern consoles, and the games were originally designed for Windows anyway, so I think that's a fair way to go about this. The only exceptions are the VR and AR games, since they were designed to be played in, VR and AR. Oh yeah, and last time I did fun facts, but this time I'm gonna do something a little more specific. When I'm done reviewing each game, I'll point out an Easter egg that a lot of people might have missed. That's gonna be hard with the older games, since they're small and have been analyzed to death, but I'll do my best. Number 19, Chica in Space. As a fan of 2D platformers, these space games are painful. The movement feels atrocious, and the maps are just random assets smashed together. There's no controller support, as far as I can get to work anyway, and the keybinds make no sense. What kind of game uses the shift key as the jump button? I had to use Joy to key in order to play this without giving myself a migraine. And even then I still made myself sick because the camera seems to go wherever it wants without any rhyme or reason. It's completely disorienting and even kind of nauseating. The game isn't balanced or fair either. There's just one part where you can get killed by rainbows that appear in random parts of the screen without any warning. That's the cheapest attack I've ever seen in something that isn't a rage game. I'm giving the gameplay a 0 out of 7. The story is as basic as can be, too. Scott doesn't want to reveal stuff from the movie, so you fight a bunch of random stuff, then fight him, and he says okay and gives you a movie teaser. I know games like these aren't typically hailed for their storytelling, but I expected a little more than this, especially when Freddy in Space 2 had a legitimate story with 2 different endings. Story also gets a 0 here. All of the artwork for this game was done by Pinky Pills, just like all the other 2D games. Even without all the controversy surrounding her, I can't say I'm a fan of her art style. Something about it just looks off. It's hard to put my finger on why. Okay, well, I can tell why with the NSFW Island level, and with the Glamrock Bonnie redesign, but you know what I mean. But hey, at least it's not Lady Fizzy art. Presentation, 0 out of 1. The only good thing in this entire game is the book references. That's it. There's nothing I like here except for 3 small Easter eggs. And our grand total is 0 out of 10. To be honest, I wasn't expecting anything to score a 0 when I started writing this script. I'm a little sad now. Easter egg. One of the backgrounds in this game originates from Fury's Rage. It can be seen on a screen in the Dreamgeist boss fight. Number 18, Special Delivery. I doubt anyone's surprised by how low this one is. The only thing that surprises me is that it's not in last place. Special Delivery was literally a scam. It existed solely to suck as much money as possible out of compulsive shoppers. Remember how you could buy Freddy Frostbear for $100 and Toy Chica for $70? And you couldn't even fight your own animatronics, so you got nothing out of these purchases, except for getting to look at them, which you could just find a YouTube video of in less than a minute. In addition to buying characters, you could also buy extra batteries for your flashlight, lures for certain characters, transponders that would reveal the identity of one animatronic on the map, salvage scanners that let your animatronics find you more stuff, and an EMF meter which allows you to collect more remnant. Now, onto the actual gameplay, which you can basically just cheat through if you buy all the stuff I just mentioned. On the occasions where you can actually get the game to work, some characters were actually kind of fun to fight against. Foxy was cool, and Ballora had a fun and unique mechanic. Shadow Bonnie was my favorite, but he gets harder each time you fight him, so after a while he becomes literally impossible to beat. Sadly, Illumix seemed hellbent on destroying the gameplay they created. They wanted it to be more of a fighting game than a horror game, so they gave the players more tools, and they wanted to make the game harder so you'd have to buy more stuff. So they gave the animatronics health bars, instead of letting you stop them with a single shock. Also, the mood is killed when the animatronics just won't stop their yapping. Their quips worked in Ultimate Custom Night because it was a joke game on the surface, and they only talked after they killed you. Here, they just blabber on and on and on, and it's rare for their lines to be threatening in any way. Here are, in my opinion, a few of the worst offenders.
I am so on fire, and you aren't.
I don't regret the experiences that have led me to be the fox that I am.
Got you! Ha 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 ha!
Although, to be fair, I have to admit that occasionally we get legitimately unsettling ones like these.
Hide if you want. It did not save the others. It will not save you.
I can hear you.
They're harder to appreciate when we're constantly bombarded with though. You might have noticed that I've been talking about this game in the past tense. That's because it doesn't exist anymore. The game was removed from the App Store, and even if you still have the app on your phone, the servers are shut down, so you can't do anything in it. It was just one last slap in the face to the few remaining fans Illumix had. Even though there were a few little things I liked, I still have to give the gameplay a 0 out of 7. As for the story, they didn't even bother to finish it. We got half of the emails that told the story of this game, and then the rest were never released. We only have them because someone luckily hacked into the pre-release game files and found them. The emails are alright. They're nothing too good or too bad. I do like how far they were willing to go with the glitch trap stuff though. I wasn't expecting a game that was originally rated E10 to go into detail about what torture methods he was planning to use on Vanessa. The main game has some story too, and it's the dumbest thing to ever happen in these games. This is like Fazbear Fright's level of stupid. Fazbear Entertainment mass produces animatronics, and they go rogue and roam the streets, looking for people who signed up for the service so they can attack them and collect their remnant. This is a publicly known thing in-universe, by the way. There are videos showing it that got hundreds of thousands of views. Also, these things can turn invisible. This technology is never used again, despite Vanessa being so desperate to catch Gregory in Security Breach, so it was clearly just thrown in so Illumix would have an excuse to show the animatronics as little as possible. I think most people pretend this game isn't canon, and I can't blame them. Story gets a 0 out of 2. I do have to admit, the artists and sound designers did a fantastic job with this game. The skins, despite being overpriced and overdone, look pretty cool most of the time, and they got better as time went on. I'm glad the character designers made the most of a bad situation when the company stopped adding in actual new characters. Just look at this little guy, he's horrific. And while I didn't like what the animatronics said or how often they said it, the voice casting was spot on here. I've heard lots of complaints about Toy Bonnie, but he sounds exactly how I'd imagine.
This next part is totally going to hurt.
And this is the first and only time we got a voice for classic Freddy that I liked.
Now would be a good time to hold your breath.
Each animatronic gets their own sound effects too, and they're amazing. Chica smacks her beak. Foxy runs around really fast on those metal legs. And most disturbingly, you can hear Springtrap's flesh being pushed around whenever he moves. Presentation is easily 1 out of 1. And our total is 1 out of 10. I'm not surprised. And I doubt anyone else who's played the game is either. Easter egg. 8-Bit Baby will spew out the numbers 1, 5, 7, and 8, which is a reference to how the background noise in Sister Location is made of slowed down, lower-pitched snippets of Baby saying those 4 numbers. Number 17, Freddy in Space 2. This game ranks slightly higher than Chica in Space, because there's more creativity and variety here. There are 6 playable characters, and making this into a charity game was a cool decision. It may be a garbage game, but it was a good community bonding experience. There is at least a way to use a controller here, although the way to access it is really weird. You have to press Ctrl Y and then check some boxes for some reason. Maybe that's the Click Team default or something? I don't know. It's not very user-friendly though. You also can't remap the buttons with this technique, so you're stuck with the strange controls Scott set. Why is the Y button the select button? Why can't I use the D-pad? Why does this get reset every time I exit the game? We may never know. The downside to this version is that the levels are so long. There aren't any checkpoints, so if you lose at the end of a level, you have to play through the entire thing again. They all have 3 bosses, and a Metroidvania-style stage between each one, so it's a long, long journey. If there's one thing I hate in games, it's long stretches of difficult gameplay with no checkpoints. That's why I couldn't get into Hollow Knight, actually. The camera feels slightly better here, but that might just be because the characters are smaller, so the camera doesn't have to move as much to follow them. I wish it didn't move up slightly every time you jump, though. That seems like a pretty rookie mistake. Once again, a 0 out of 7 for gameplay. The story here does the bare minimum, which is a lot more than Chica in Space had. I feel like I have to give it a point just for existing though, considering the type of game this is. And also because it's hilarious that there's an ending where you take too long to beat the game, and Freddy's son dies from lack of oxygen. Story gets a 1 out of 2. This game has the exact same presentation problem as Chica in Space. It's drawn by Pinky Pills. The player character sprites are a lot better, but that's the only improvement. This is the game that introduced us to Already Ate Chica, which is... no comment. Presentation, 0 out of 1. And our total is... 1 out of 10. Easter egg. One of the songs in this game is a remix of Nowhere to Run, and its title is Through the Cracks. I find that to be really clever. Number 16, Fury's Rage. I didn't remember the gameplay here at all, so I had to go back and replay it. My first thought upon doing so... My thumb hurts. I don't know much about fighter games, but I feel like there's supposed to be more to them than button mashing against swarms of the same few enemies. Or maybe there isn't, and I'd hate any fighter game. Gameplay, 1 out of 7. The story here is in the same boat as Freddy in Space 2. It's really simple, but it exists, which is already above the minimum requirements for a Street Fighter style joke game, I guess. Story gets 1 out of 2 points. The problem with the presentation is, well, can you guess? I'll give you a second. It's all Pinky Pills art. Did you guess right? Presentation, once again, 0 out of 1. The total is 2 out of 10. Sorry there isn't much to say about these joke games, but to be honest, I only played each of them once or twice, and I never beat any of them. Nothing about them is really worth the effort of discussing beyond a surface level. Easter egg. The Pizzaplex level has CDs hanging from the ceiling, possibly foreshadowing the retro CDs in Security Breach. Number 15, Security Breach. I've often asked myself if this game gets more hate than it deserves. I've gone back and forth, but eventually I came to the conclusion that the amount of hate is warranted, and it's just the fact that nobody has any better ideas for what this game could have been that makes it feel blown out of proportion. You know, the old, if it's so bad then make a better one yourself argument. I think one of the big problems is that on the surface it looks like there's tons of potential here, but there really isn't much unless you completely rebuild the gameplay, story, and location from the ground up, at which point it isn't the same game anymore. Most of the gameplay is a crime, to be honest. Five Nights at Freddy's got where it is today because it was unique in the indie horror landscape. It stood out in an ocean of free-roam hide-and-seek fetch quest games. And for the most part, Security Breach turned it into exactly that. The worst part, though, is that the game is terrible at telling you where to go and what to do. Because the map is so open, you could run in circles for hours trying to figure out what's going on. And this caused a lot of glitches, too, since certain locations are tied to specific scripted events. And let's not forget the save system. After 6 AM, the save spots are all locked, except for a single one in the middle of the building, and even that was only added due to complaints. Because of this, you could lose hours upon hours of progress because you didn't have a chance to get to that single save spot. It's a real jerk move on the developer's part, in my opinion. It doesn't add anything to the experience. It just unfairly punishes players and makes them understandably want to give up. There are a few parts I like, at least. The office segments range from okay to good, and the DJ Music Man segment is a standout moment. I'll be generous and give the gameplay 1 point out of 7. The story here is so poorly handled that it's actually fun to pick it apart and try to understand what went wrong. I think Steel Wool either forgot or just wasn't told to introduce a lot of important plot points. For example, when Gregory is given the option to leave and get the bad ending, he says that nothing will change and people will keep disappearing. But there was never any mention of disappearances before this point. Speaking of endings, another part of the problem is that they wanted to have too many, and as a consequence, none had any real meat to them. I feel like I should go through the story chronologically and point out the few things that work, as well as the many things that don't. This might take a while, so let's just jump right into it. The game starts with not our main protagonist. Freddy discovers that Gregory is hiding in his stomach hatch. The reason for Gregory hiding in there is because Vanessa was trying to get him. He claims to not know who she is, and he offers no further explanation as to what he means by get me. So Freddy should naturally assume that Gregory either broke a rule or isn't supposed to be here, and security wants to deal with the situation. But no, Freddy immediately takes Gregory's side and tries to hide him from Vanessa.
Officer Vanessa, I do not know how I got here.
After Gregory fails to escape, Freddy says he'll help him find another way out, and Gregory ends up running and hiding from the animatronics. But how does he know that he needs to do this? Shouldn't he assume they'd want to help him like Freddy does? Freddy even calls this out at one point, and Gregory has no rebuttal. The game failed so badly to establish stakes that even the protagonist can't explain how he knows he's in danger. So after a while, Vanessa finally catches Gregory. He faints or something, and wakes up in Lost and Found. Right after this, Vanny starts coming to attack him. Did Vanessa leave the room just to put the Vanny suit on and then come back? That's so stupid. She wasted her chance to kill him, all to put on some costume. After this, there's a bunch more hiding and sneaking and some random shenanigans thrown in here and there. And then you make it to 6 a.m. At this point, we can reach a total of 6 different endings. I don't know what order to put them in, so I'm just gonna steal the order from IGN. First is the bad ending, where you escape and get hunted down and killed by Vanny. This is the only time in the entire game where Vanny is an actual threat, but that topic has been discussed to death, so I'll just leave it at that. Second is the loading dock ending, which is the main joke ending. It feels really out of place, because unlike the other endings, you don't have to do anything special to get it. You just go to the loading docks. That's it. Third is the fire escape ending, where Freddy suddenly decides to set the building on fire with his friends inside of it, then pushes Vanny off the roof and falls with her, even though he could have easily stopped himself from falling. And then, Gregory discovers that Vanny was actually Vanessa the whole time. Who could have guessed?
Vanny. It is very similar to Vanessa, and also Bunny. That cannot be a coincidence.
Then after the credits, we find out that Vanny wasn't Vanessa? That's clearly the intention, because the music playing is called Who is Who. But it's kind of impossible given everything else we know.
It looks like you were shopping for a costume. You purchased some fake fur material. What are you gonna make?
I can't talk about this. He said he would always be watching.
I could only assume that Steel Wool included this as another joke ending, without thinking about how it would have ramifications on the plot of the rest of the game. Fourth is the Disassemble Vanny ending. This was supposed to be a sad ending, but it just comes across as funny because of the comic book style and just everything about it, really.
Did they run out of budget for the last animation?
Fifth is the Princess Quest ending. In this one, Gregory somehow realizes that the Princess Quest arcade cabinets are the key to freeing Vanessa, despite him never vocalizing that he knows this, or even that he's aware Vanessa needs to be saved to begin with. This ended up being the true ending, though, so either he made an incredibly lucky guess, or he knew a lot more than he was letting on. Usually you should know all of the relevant info that the person you're playing as does, though, so both possibilities are concerning. Finally, there's the Burn Trap ending. This is the most fleshed out of the endings, no pun intended. It's a big lore dump about how William Afton and Molten Freddy survived the Pizzeria Simulator fire. Or, at least, that's what they want you to think. In reality, a series of convoluted coincidences led to it seeming like the Pizzeria Simulator ending was moot. I don't understand the point. Did Scott not tell Steel Wool that this wasn't supposed to be the real Springtrap? Actually, that probably is what happened.
So as we're building the game, I get an email from Scott, and he says, "Hey, put this stuff in the game." And I look at it all. I examine it as a producer would do, and I say, "I have no idea what any of this means." And he goes, "Yeah, put it in the game." Don't worry, I know. Cool, you got it.
It's amazing how much miscommunication was involved in the making of this game. I certainly hope it was a learning experience for both Scott and Steel Wool. I just realized that I said I would talk about the good parts of the story too, but I've only said bad stuff. So, I guess there is nothing good. Sorry about that. At least that makes it easy to give this one 0 out of 2 points. I'm personally not a fan of the aesthetic this game was going for, but that doesn't mean Steel Wool didn't do a fantastic job at achieving the look and feel that they wanted. Everything here is so over-the-top 80s. They really did their homework when making this place. They even made a blog post about how in-depth they got, and it's honestly pretty impressive. It's clear they put their heart and soul into designing the Pizzaplex. Just without considering what we'd actually do in the Pizzaplex. It gave us a fantastic location to explore later down the line, though. The character designs range from okay to amazing. DJ Music Man and the daycare attendant are my favorites, especially the latter. He's such a cool-looking character, especially the moon version. He perfectly encapsulates the joy during the day, horror during the night theme that shows up in most of these games. So I hope he continues to be present in future entries, and maybe even gets a more important role in the story. The only designs that I'd consider subpar are Burntrap and the Tangle, who are both mainly asset flips from Help Wanted. The only major complaint I have is that despite this game being completely free roam, there's no field of view slider, and so I get nauseous watching footage of it. Oh, and the main menu is terrible. I expected way more from a game of this size. Still, if those are my biggest complaints, then obviously I'm gonna give this game the presentation point. And the total is 2 out of 10. This is actually the only game I've ever refunded. I had more time put into it than I'm supposed to have in order to get one, but I guess Steam accepted the nausea thing as a good enough excuse. Or they just didn't care. That's probably more likely. Easter egg. Down in the cave section of this game, there's a Foxy plush hidden in a hole in the wall. I can't find any footage of this one, which is why I'm bringing this up instead of something more significant. I'm hoping someone will be able to find it again. Number 14, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. This is the most overrated Five Nights at Freddy's game. The office segments are simply a chore. I just sit there waiting to get back to the part of the game that's actually fun. Whenever I run out of play tokens and have to start the day, I feel like I'm being punished for having enjoyed myself too much. The mechanics are somehow too simple yet too complicated at the same time. I couldn't keep track of what hand unit was telling me the first time he gave the instructions, and you can't make him repeat himself, so I had to start the game over just to understand what I was supposed to do. There are no cameras, just a map where you can see when the animatronics moved. There's an audio lure like in the third game, but it's far less intuitive since you need to be on the tracker mode instead if you want to see the characters move. And then finally there's silent ventilation, which is the dumbest one because all it does is stop you from passing out. It's not tied to a character or set up like the power outage in the first game or anything. The screen just fades out and you get a message saying you blacked out. Ultimate Custom Night was able to tie heat to characters' mechanics, so why couldn't this game? Speaking of characters, every single one in the game is functionally the same. They move around in the vents, and if they get near you, you have to stop making noise. That's it. On the later nights, you get stuck in a cycle of almost finishing a task, but then having to shut the computer down because someone is in the vent next to you. That's not challenging, it's just tedious. Are there still those teachers who give out homework assignments that would be really easy if there weren't like 50 questions, most of which involve guess and check so you have to go back and redo them several times? I haven't been in school for years, but I assume that's still a thing. And that's exactly what it feels like here. The mini-games, on the other hand, are a lot more fun than I would have expected. It's clear that most of the effort was put there, rather than the main office gameplay. Scott even said that this is the kind of thing he wanted to be making at the time. There's plenty of variety, too. There's a plain shooter game like Foxy Fighters, which is the one Scott specifically called out. There's a maze one, there's a racing one, there's a basketball one, and then there are a few chance-based ones. I hope we get something like this again someday. Help Wanted 2 tried to do a Pizzaplex version with the arcade section, but it tried to be horror-themed at the same time, so it didn't work out too well. I wish we had gotten that Endless Tycoon game, or even just a fan game. I've only found a few unfinished ones. I go back to this game every now and then and just don't do the salvages, so that I can play through the good bits and rush through the boring office stuff. Because I'm able to do that, I can't rank the gameplay too low, so I'm gonna go with a 3 out of 7. Without the Tycoon parts, it would have been a 0, and without the office parts, it would have been a 6. Where do I even begin with the story? There was so much potential that this game could have tapped into. Ennard and Springtrap were on the loose. Michael was questioning his continued earthly existence, and set himself on a quest to find his father. The crying child story was lacking a resolution, and it was debatable whether the missing children were really freed. So, naturally, Pizzeria Simulator took all of these loose threads and set them on fire. Baby, set on fire. Springtrap, set on fire a second time. Michael, set on fire. The missing kids, set on fire. The crying child? Well, actually, we have no idea what happened to him. Despite all of the most important characters being brought into the same place, they pay no mind to each other. Michael says nothing when he finally encounters his father, and he throws him and Elizabeth into a ventilation system to, as far as he knows, be used for parts at a later time. And he only ever gets to learn what's been wrong with him for decades in one of the non-canon endings. William walks into a trap while knowing that it's founded on a lie, says barely anything of note to Michael, and doesn't acknowledge the animatronic he sent Mike to go rescue in the first place. Baby is suddenly a bloodthirsty daddy's girl who's more than happy to be locked in a dark basement, despite her entire goal and sister location being to escape one. And somehow she doesn't even recognize her dad from his voice. Molten Freddy contains all 5 of the missing children, yet he acts like one entity, once again ripping away the individuality the 5 of them had in the first game. In fact, so little is done with this concept that we didn't even know it was a thing until the 4th Closet released and did the same thing except better. The puppet just tries to kill Mike and says, "Shh," despite the fact that she's supposed to be a protector, and she's in the vents with the killer and his assistant. Also, why did Scott go to the effort of making Baby and the puppet be foils to each other if he was never going to have them interact in the slightest? And last but not least, we have Henry, a new addition to the cast, at least in regards to the game timeline. He's pretty clearly a Scott Cawthon self-insert here. He's sick of lying awake at night thinking about what he's created, so he destroys it all. Scott himself said that he made the game out of necessity because the story needed an ending, and it really shows. You can just feel how much he wanted to get this over with, which is ironic given how games and books have still kept getting pumped out constantly during the 6 years after this one was released. And Henry is treated like a hero here, but his actions don't align with that of a hero. He's stuck so deep in his "the ends justify the means" mentality that he never once even acknowledges the means, other than referring to the guy he told to sit in a vent with killer animatronics as a brave volunteer. And then he kills himself before he can see if his plan worked. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Well, I guess it partially worked, since Baby and Molten Freddy are seemingly out of the picture. But the main threat and Henry's own daughter both survived the fire. Henry Emily, the voice of reason. I will never, ever get over this. Just like with the gameplay, I like the presentation for the tycoon segments, but not the office section. The pizzeria is really neat, and even cute looking. It's full of whimsy, assuming you actually buy stuff, and the environment reflects your progress, which is nice. The office feels like it's trying to go for that cramped, dingy aesthetic that the first game went for, but it doesn't work nearly as well. It's a metal box with a computer and a few drawings. It's boring. The very second I saw the office for the first time, I thought to myself, that's it? That's the office? Surely this can't be an actual major part of the game. Oh, how wrong I was. The models are varied here. Some of them are cool, like Music Man and Molten Freddy. Some are atrocious, like William Afton and Funtime Chica. And some are just boring, like Lefty and the Rockstars. Ironically, I did think the intentionally bad animatronics were pretty cute, but I don't know if I should consider that a good thing or a bad thing. I feel like the scrap animatronics were designed specifically to be seen in the salvage sections, because to be honest, every single one of them looks great there. It's in the jump scares where you see them in their full, well, not glory, but you know what I mean, that you can see how awful they are. This is a great example of why some monsters need to be left to the player's imagination. This is scary. This isn't. Presentation 0.5 out of 1. Is it cheating to use half points? I don't think so. And the total is 3.5 out of 10. Easter egg. If you pick onions, mushrooms, olives, and peppers at the start of the game, you'll get an extra $100 when you begin the tycoon segments, which helps out a lot if you're planning to buy every item. Number 13, Help Wanted 2. This game has a bunch of different minigames sorted into 6 sections, so I'll go through the sections one at a time and then regroup to talk about the game as a whole. First up is Backstage. Here we have arts and crafts levels with Sun and Moon, and salon levels with Staffbots and Roxanne Wolf. These are pretty simple concepts. You do a task while being timed. You have to do them correctly while also finishing before time runs out. They can get pretty unforgiving though, so it's not as easy as it sounds. I wasn't really a fan of these. They feel less like a game and more like work. I don't like work. Next is Fazcade. Wow, finally it really will be all fun and games. Bonkabon is really fun, even if it does bring back the dreaded plush babies. DJ Music Man's first level is good, but the second one is annoying because you have to keep dealing with the mini Music Men. It's a cheap distraction in my opinion. Bazzer Blast would be fun if I had proper depth perception, but I don't, so it's basically impossible for me. And Bonnie Bowl? Well, it's another level that would be nice if it weren't for cheap distractions. A bunch of stuff was thrown in here so that the level could have jump scares and thus technically be horror, but it's so poorly integrated. Just let me fail at bowling in peace. After that is Staff Only. This is where we get our one and only repair level, which is weird because this game is partially themed after Sister Location, and that's where the idea for repair levels originated. Here we repair Glamrock Freddy, and he's certainly a lot chattier than the guys in the original Help Wanted. It wasn't as annoying as I thought it would be though, because it was funny to see this guy who's normally so nice act like a brat.
No, not that cake. Little Jimmy's cake is trapped inside my stomach hatch. Little Jimmy would know the difference.
After that, we get First Aid levels, which are basically Pizzeria Simulator's office segments, except with actual thought put into them. There's one with Scrap Baby, Lefty, and Pig Patch for some reason. These are really funny. You get to brutally torture Helpy. How could you not enjoy that? The Endo warehouse level is incredibly challenging, but still kind of fun. Good luck with this one if you have a bad short-term memory, though. There's no way you're beating it without a miracle. And then there are 5 Fizzy Faz levels. These are more levels where you just do a job while someone pesters you. It hits a bit too close to home. Not exactly the type of horror I was looking for. Then we get to food prep. Guess what you do here? If you guessed more work, then you're right. Once again, we're in the food service industry, and boy is it mind-numbing. The only relief is that you can throw food at the customers, but you're wasting precious time if you do that, so it's not really worth it. The customers even yell at you for taking too long. Is this supposed to be a torture simulator or something? Next up is Ticket Booth. This is a short segment, with just 2 carousel levels and a log ride level. I really like these ones. Carousel, despite making me incredibly dizzy, is my favorite level in the game. It's a great mix of whimsical and scary. Moon has always been particularly creepy to me, and the weird carousel faces really add to the creep factor. I love the way that the music gets louder and more frantic as you get farther into the level. It's a really nice auditory indication that Moon is getting more aggressive. The log ride is a sequel to Curse of Dreadbear's pirate ride, and it's just as good as the original. Except for Foxy's voice. I'm sure they had to come up with something on short notice since they didn't want to use Chris McCullough. But surely they could have found something better than J-Top's unenthusiastic attempt.
Welcome aboard Captain Foxy's Pirate Adventure! For your safety, keep your hands inside the ride at all times, or you'll end up like me.
Welcome to Captain Foxy's Cowboy Adventure. Keep your hands and feet in the ride at all times, or ye'll end up like me.
Last but not least is Sister Location. This one recreates some minigames from the titular game, and creates some of its own. It's got the Ballora Gallery level, the Breaker Room level, and the Ennard boss fight. These were good picks. Breaker Room was my favorite challenge in Sister Location, and Ballora Gallery was up there too. The Ennard fight is improved here, because you can rely on visual cues, and it's not nearly as long, lasting about 6 minutes compared to 9 in the original version. The Ballora Private Room level and the Funtime Gang level are sort of adaptations of Sister Location Custom Night, but with their own spin on things. The first one throws in Minorinas who will crawl onto your door buttons and prevent you from pressing them until you throw the Minorinas off. And the latter adds in Funtime Chica and also makes it so Bon Bon can attack from the vent. I don't think these are as well balanced as they were before, but they're still pretty fun. Lastly, there's Job Interview, which is certainly an interesting one. This one has Baby instruct you on how to deal with her plush babies, which is blatant bitty bit erasure if you ask me. The ending was really creepy. You've been taught not to take ice cream from Baby, but here you have to do it, so it's incredibly tense the first time you play. All in all, I'd say the gameplay here is just okay. Steel Wool made a big deal about this game being replayable, but in reality, they just switch up the order of some stuff and add in miscellaneous varying threats that don't feel natural in the slightest. Also, there were a concerning number of times where I compared levels to working an actual job. I'm gonna give the gameplay 3 points out of 7. Slightly less than half. I think that's fair. The story here was a major downgrade from Ruin. Just when it seemed like they finally stepped up and decided to tell a real story, they fell back into the habit of throwing in vague details that could be put together to vaguely resemble a story. What's funny is that this actually caused theorists to understand what's going on for once. It's like they can only comprehend a story when it should be incomprehensible. We get a few hints that we're playing as Cassie's dad, and the game ends with us seeing the start of Ruin, and that's about it. Well, there's also the Princess Quest 4 ending, but it's just a redo of Princess Quest 3. Nothing changes here, which would be fine if it had been a self-contained game, but it's clearly trying to be a meaningful piece of the overarching story. The only thing I liked here was the twist halfway through that we've had the Vanny mask stuck on our face the whole time. That was a clever tie-in to Ruin. Still, I don't expect that anyone will fault me for giving this game's story 0 points out of 2. On the bright side, the character models here are stunning. This is the best they've ever looked, I think. The security breach characters all got little tweaks that improve on their designs. And all of Scott's characters look better here than they did in their original games, aside from maybe the Funtime gang. Take a look at Ennard. His wires actually make sense now instead of clipping into each other all over the place. And Scrap Baby doesn't have Minecraft withering anymore. Pigpatch is another standout. He actually looks scary for once. I hope that if this game gets a DLC, they'll add Molten Freddy and Scrap Trap, because I'd love to see Steel Wool's take on them. I love the music here too. Doomsday Ride immediately became my favorite FNAF song, dethroning Travel 2 after almost 8 years. Presentation, 1 out of 1. And the total is 4 out of 10. This'll definitely be disappointing to a lot of people since I see the game get praised constantly, but I just really wasn't feeling it. I'm glad other people seem to find enjoyment in it though. Easter egg. Well, I'm not sure if this actually counts as an Easter egg, or if it's just something most players probably wouldn't need to encounter, but if you refuse to collect the Faz Force toys, Helpy will get increasingly angry with you. Number 12, Sister Location. It's abundantly clear that this game was designed to be watched, not played. It's basically a movie that occasionally makes you stop to do a task before you can keep watching. This is great for Let's Players who can trim all the deaths and just show us the narrative, but not good for the rest of us. If you've ever played this game, assuming you're not insanely good and never got any game overs, you'll know that you have to sit through a lot of cutscenes and replay a lot of minigames multiple times. Let's say you go through the Ballora Gallery, finish the Breaker Room task, and then die on your way back through the Ballora Gallery. You're gonna have to do all of that over again. Or say you exit the game after several failed attempts on Night 4. You're gonna have to sit through the whole 5-minute cutscene again before you can get back to the gameplay. And don't get me started on getting the fake ending. Every time you die in the private room, you have to walk back through the Funtime Auditorium, do the baby repair task, and walk back to the private room in order to try again. Also, someone on Discord just reminded me of this while I was writing this script. Even when you beat the game, you can't go back to play a certain minigame. You have to play the whole thing again in order to get back to it. That really sucks for Night 4 fans, if such a thing exists. This is one of those things that would have been so incredibly easy to patch into the game that I cannot fathom why it was never done. To be fair though, I can't imagine there being lots of fans of particular minigames, because most of them are half-baked. The Biddy Babs pull on the door twice and that's it. The Breaker Room minigame was fun at least. And you know what? I'm gonna put a mini ranking video within this ranking video right now, going from worst to best Sister Location minigame. Number 9, Night 4. Everyone hates Night 4. Number 8, Night 5 Funtime Gallery. You just move when baby tells you to. That's it. Number 7, Biddy Babs. Nothing happens. Number 6, Baby Repair. Nothing happens except for the annoying keypad part that pairs horribly with the game's custom mouse controls. Number 5, Ennard Night. This is far too long, but at least it's real gameplay. Number 4, Funtime Freddy Repair. It's okay, but it's not as good as the VR ones. The scale just doesn't feel right here, and Freddy doesn't look threatening in this part. He isn't even a threat, only Bonbon is. Number 3, Night 3 Funtime Auditorium. It's okay. That's all I can really say about it. Number 2, Ballora Gallery. This is the only one that's actually scary. The music and Ballora's singing make it really tense, and Hand Unit made me panic a little the first time I played through it.
It seems you are taking a long time. Please proceed as quickly and as quietly as possible.
Number 1, Breaker Room. This one is a lot of fun. Funtime Freddy is at his most intimidating here, and it's a fun twist on the formula to have the monitor be a distraction from the animatronic, rather than a tool to help you defend against them. Since there are a couple good parts, which funnily enough are both on the same night, I'll give the gameplay a 1 out of 7. The upside of this game being a cutscene fest is that it has the best story of them all. Almost every story detail in here was brilliant in my opinion, and pushed the lore from a neat backgrounding to a central point of the franchise. The story progressed in such a nice way. At first you think it's like the other games where you're just some random idiot working at one of these death traps, but then on night 2, Baby calls that into question.
It's a strange thing to want to do, to come here. I'm curious what events would lead a person to want to spend their nights in a place like this, willingly.
At this point you realize there's something more going on here, but you don't know what. The next night, though, you learn that Baby was forced to kill a little girl, and the pieces start to fall into place. Before each night up to this point, there had been a voice of a little girl saying she wanted to see Baby.
Daddy, just once let me go play with her. She's so pretty and shiny. Didn't you make her just for me?
Clearly that was the little girl Baby killed, and we have some connection to her. Then when we get to night 4, we learn that Baby isn't quite who she seems, and that she holds some sort of resentment for us, and has some very particular suspicions.
Do you ever play make-believe? Pretend to be one way when you are really the other? It's very important.
So now it's starting to look like both the player and Baby are pretending to be someone other than who they really are. And then on night 5, Baby tricks us into standing in front of the scooper so she can use our body as a hiding place and finally escape. And we just let her. We aren't given the option to run. Well, we are, but that's in the fake ending. In the real ending, we sacrifice ourselves for her. Why? A lot of people had probably put it together at this point, but for those that didn't, there's still another ending to explore. In this one, Baby tells us exactly why we're here.
Isn't this why you came here? To be with her again?
And then, she reveals exactly who she is.
Isn't this why you came here? To be with me again?
Baby was the little girl the whole time, and we were the one who turned our back and let her get killed. Or, at least, that's who she thinks we are. You see, there's a clever double twist here. Most people didn't notice it at the time, but there were quite a few hints sprinkled throughout the game that we weren't actually the girl's dad. The first clue is in the name itself, Sister Location. The second clue is in the player's name, Mike. Everything pointed towards the little girl's dad being William, but particularly observant fans already knew from the 4th game who Mike was, and he wasn't William. He was the Foxy bully, the one who accidentally killed his brother and had an unseen sister. And when you go back and notice that, everything finally clicks into place for real this time. Michael came here as a way of atoning for his mistakes. His sister, Baby, mistook him for his father. He went along with it, and eventually he chose to sacrifice himself for her. All of this would be confirmed later on, but it was so cool for fans who put it together themselves upon the game's release. Now, let me jump back to the start for a second. You may have noticed at the beginning of this section that I said almost every detail was brilliant. That's because there was one thing here that was really, really stupid. The nightmare experiments. This one Easter egg was the first instance of the fourth game being rewritten, and it wouldn't be the last. It created a second explanation that people disliked so much that it had to be undone, while also sort of not being undone by making several contradictory theories true at the same time. Still, compared to all the good stuff I just listed, I'm willing to overlook this and give the game's story a full 2 out of 2 points. In addition to playing differently to the other games, this one looks a lot different too. It makes you feel like you're in unfamiliar territory, which should make things scarier. But nothing about the environment comes across as too threatening, which makes things less scary. So really it kinda evens itself out. One thing I do really like is how the rooms constantly switch from claustrophobic little vents and cubbyholes to wide open spaces that are too dark for you to see where the threats lie. That way you never get a chance to get used to the type of scenario you've been placed in, unlike the other games. The characters in this game all look great. Some of my favorite designs from the series are from here, like Funtime Freddy and Baby. The faceplates are such a neat idea. They sell the idea that these are thinly veiled killing machines better than any other animatronic line, because the veil has literal cracks in it and lifts itself constantly. This was the first game to give the animatronics full-on personalities, instead of just an inkling at best like 1 through 4. Baby is my all-time favorite character. I love how she's kind of on the fence between genuine villain and misunderstood victim. She's trying to manipulate and hurt us, but isn't it justified in a way? Us employees hurt her first, and it's her only way out of this torture chamber she's trapped in. Unfortunately, Pizzeria Simulator wiped the nuance away, but that's a problem with scrapped Baby instead of regular Baby. The other fun times are great too, even if they're not nearly as deep. Funtime Freddy is the sadistic one, Ballora is the graceful one, and Funtime Foxy is the animalistic one. And the Biddy Babs are just kinda there, so I don't really care about them one way or the other. The only character I didn't like was Hand Unit. He told the same lame jokes over and over, and it really killed the tension, and more importantly, got on my nerves.
It seems that you had some trouble with the keypad.
Exotic butters.
I see what you were trying to type.
Exotic butters.
It seems that you had
Exotic butters. Exotic butters.
Shut up! Definitely giving this one a point for presentation. And the total is 4 out of 10. I thought this one would get more. Maybe it just felt like it because of how good the story and presentation are. Oh well, I'm still gonna stick with my system, because those two things aren't enough to make me ever revisit this game again. Also, I didn't think I'd have so much to say about this one. This has taken up over 3 pages of the script. I thought it would fill 1 page at most. Easter egg. There's an incredibly rare chance of a Minarina jumping out of your popcorn bucket in the TV segments. It took forever for anyone to get footage of this, so it was initially dismissed as a false rumor. Number 11. Five Nights at Freddy's 2. There are 2 types of Five Nights at Freddy's fans. Those whose favorite game is the second one, and those who have actually played the second one. It feels like everything after Night 2 is designed to be as painful as possible. Almost every character has the exact same mechanic. The only camera you ever have to look at is the prize counter, and it's not even to look at anything. It's just so you can hold down a button on the screen. Probably the most difficult threat is Foxy, and he's completely unfair. You're supposed to shine the flashlight to see if he's in the hallway, and if he is, you need to keep flicking it on and off until he leaves. The problem is that Scott didn't make renders of Foxy with certain other characters in the hall. Foxy can be there despite not being visible, but he also might not be there. so you have to take the chance of either wasting your flashlight batteries on a non-existent threat, or ignoring a ticking time bomb, all because Scott thought releasing the game as soon as possible was more important than making sure it worked. Also, when characters are moving, the flashlight gets disabled for several seconds, so it seems like over half the time that Foxy is in the hallway, you don't actually get to see that it's the case. As for the other characters, they're pretty easy to deal with, if you don't waste time doing things like, say, thinking. In order to be quick enough to deal with them, you have to repeat the same cycle over and over. Pull up the cameras, wind the music box, pull down the cameras, put on the mask, take it off if/when nothing is there, and shine the flashlight. Beyond that, it's entirely luck-based. You can do this exact same thing every time and get completely different results. This will be okay in a game like, say, Five Nights at Freddy's 3, because that one's all about adjusting your strategy to fit the situation. But there's no way to do that here. You have to follow the same pattern even if it gets you killed, because not following it will get you killed even faster. Playing this game is like rolling a die, except you have to spend 7 minutes shaking it before you roll. Because there are 2 nights with enough leniency for you to poke around and have fun experimenting, I'm giving this one 2 points out of 7. Since there are 7 nights, I think that works out well. This game has a fantastic story, taking into account its own limitations as a sit-and-survive style game. The death minigames were a genius way of incorporating story without forcing the player to sit through cutscenes, which according to Scott was the intent behind them. The phone calls did a great job of drip-feeding bits of the story before the bombshell Night 6 call explained everything.
Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it.
And having the game secretly be a prequel was a smart move too. It expanded the backstory a lot more than a sequel would have. It's funny how this game introduced the most backstory out of probably any game, and yet these days it's the least relevant entry. All the stuff set up here either gets elaborated on later in such a way that you'd still know about it without ever touching this game, or gets completely abandoned. I can't fault this game for what later games did with it though, so that doesn't affect the ranking. Story, 2 out of 2. The map layout is far dumber here than it is in any other game, and some of the renders, mostly of Mangle, are very lazy. You can clearly tell that there are separately rendered PNGs that are slapped on top of the background. The lighting doesn't match up at all. But everything other than that is great. The place has some of the same signs of decay from the first game's location, but it's toned down since this place is supposed to be shiny and new. The office feels way more open than in the first game, with a giant door you can't close in the front and 2 freakishly big open vents on the sides. The withered animatronics are the coolest looking line of them all, and the toys do their job for the most part. And then there's the puppet, which is an amazing horror antagonist design. He's been plastered all over the place over the years, so he's not scary anymore. But at the time, this guy was horrifying, especially since Phone Guy builds him up as a particularly strong threat multiple times. Even though the cameras are useless, I like how they show more of the functional parts of the location here than the first game did. We got the stage, Kids Cove, 4 party rooms, a game room, and a prize counter. The first game just showed the stage, Pirate Cove, and a dining room. There's no kitchen in this one, though. It can't even be off the map layout, because that's against company policy. Where does the pizza come from? Did they order it from somewhere else? That sounds inefficient. Despite its flaws, I have to give the presentation a 1 out of 1. And the total is... mediocre. 5 out of 10. Easter egg. There's a character marker in the game files labeled as Mike, depicting what looks like part of a poorly drawn skull. Or, as many other people have said, Frogget from Undertale. It never gets used for anything, and it's different from every other marker in that it's the only one using sprite art. The rest are just colors. Number 10. Ruin. Just like the base security breach, gameplay isn't this DLC's strong suit. It's fun at first, but by halfway through it becomes tiring. It's usually either a walking simulator or the same two puzzles over and over, and when it breaks away from that, it's usually for the sake of something equally frustrating. The difficulty spikes are weird too. For example, it's almost impossible to die in the daycare section, but then the section right after that is brutal. Because there's a little bit of genuine, somewhat interesting gameplay sprinkled in, I'll give this one a 2 out of 7. While I wasn't a fan of the gameplay, I was a huge fan of the story. It reminds me a lot of Sister Location in that it feels designed to be watched rather than played. This DLC does a fantastic job at drip-feeding us information that leads to some shocking revelations. At first, it seems obvious what's going on here. After the burn trap ending of Security Breach, the building collapsed and Gregory got stuck in the sinkhole. But the deeper you go into your journey, the more holes start to pop up in that assumption. First, Gregory is acting strange. He's saying things that you wouldn't expect him to say, and if you listen carefully, you'll even notice that some of his lines are spliced together from a security breach dialogue, like a YouTube poop.
Down there, sinkhole under the raceway. Cassie, can you hear me? I finally have a clear signal!
Then, we're introduced to this strange blue rabbit entity. What is this thing? Glitch trap? Why does it look different? It, along with this whole Vanny network, were clearly installed after the events of Security Breach, and they exist specifically to keep people away. So, if workers were here building a security system, why didn't they find Gregory? He had a walkie-talkie that was allowing him to communicate to the ground floor, after all. Eventually, you find your first major clue as to what's happening. Vanny's old hideout. There's a busted Princess Quest 3 arcade cabinet sitting on the floor, and when you put your mask on, the Sword of Light is stuck through it. So, does that mean the Princess Quest ending was the canon one, not the burn trap one? But if that's true, then Gregory can't be trapped in the sinkhole. Shortly after this, our suspicions are confirmed. Freddy is stuck in a pile of rubble in Phaser Blast, and as he gets up, we get to see that he's missing his head, and his stomach is ripped apart, just like in the Princess Quest ending. So that confirms it without a doubt. The thing in the sinkhole isn't Gregory. So what is it? Soon after, we get our answer, and it led to people who read the books absolutely flipping out, and people who didn't read them saying, "What's that supposed to be?" Luckily, the real Gregory catches everyone up to speed. The thing in the sinkhole is an evil old endoskeleton that's trying to escape by manipulating you into freeing it, so it can apparently go after Gregory specifically. And it succeeded. And then...
But we can't risk being followed. I'm sorry.
Gregory? No!
Yeah, that. Now, I'll go back to Gregory later, but first, I want to talk about the other characters we meet throughout our journey. Normally I'd talk about the characters under the presentation section, but here they're intrinsically tied to the story itself. Funny how rare that is in these games. The first character we meet is Chica. She's fully succumbed to her food addiction now, and it's clear that she's barely even conscious. It's sad, and there's nothing you can do about it. The best you can do is give her a new voice box, but all she does with it is talk about pizza and then shuts down. After that is Monty. He was always the brute of the gang, but now he's gone savage. There isn't a single thought in that gator head beyond attack. He's basically a vicious pit bull. He's one of my favorites here, because he's the perfect example of how ruined this place really is. Then we meet Helpy. Not Helpy with a Y from Pizzeria Simulator, Helpy with an I. He's a seemingly helpful AI, but he's incredibly pushy and has no sense of social awareness. He says stuff like,
I said should be safe. It is not safe, and I am not wrong.
He also feels pretty manipulative at times.
There is nothing to worry about. Everything appears to be perfectly normal. You must be seeing things.
He clearly knows more than he's letting on, and after a while it starts to become clear that he's intentionally toying with you. You can't get rid of him though. He's literally planted into your head. He's like Hand Unit, but actually funny and also a genuine threat. Then there's the daycare attendant. He's gone insane.
Inside my head!
Thankfully, we can actually do something about it this time. We somehow managed to merge the sun and moon personalities together just by turning a switch, which makes it weird that none of the technicians were able to do it. And it turns him into the friendly Eclipse. I wonder if he'll ever make a return as an ally. He's probably the only animatronic left in this place worth salvaging for whatever Fazbear Entertainment is planning next. Well, there would be one other, but, well, she's up next anyway, so let's talk about her. Roxanne plays a very different role here than she did before. In Security Breach, she was the only one who seemed to have a personal hatred for Gregory, mostly because he stole her eyes, but even somewhat before that.
I bet you don't even have friends. You are nothing! Nobody will miss you.
But here, once she realizes who you are, she treats you as a friend. Unfortunately, we have to abuse her trust in order to progress. It's a really sad scene. Until a few minutes later when she miraculously reactivates and shows up out of nowhere to save the day. Only to seemingly get deactivated a second time, only to show up yet again after the credits. I'm not a fan of fake-out deaths, and they did a particularly awful job of it here anyway. So this plot point really rubbed me the wrong way. Finally, the one you've been waiting for, Gregory. He's the perfect foil to Cassie. She feels awful for all these characters, and she tries her best to help them, even at her own risk. Except Monty, but, he's legitimately evil. Gregory, on the other hand, abandons them and even Cassie in order to save his own skin. I don't think Gregory is a monster like some fans seem to. I'm just pointing out the stark contrast between the two, and why his betrayal was such an interesting direction for the story to take. They both act in ways that make sense given their past experiences. Gregory got roped into the whole glitch trap thing and had to fight for his life against these characters, wanting nothing but to escape. Letting Cassie escape would put that freedom at risk, so he doesn't let her escape. Cassie, on the other hand, never had a friend until Gregory, and her dad seems to be a really busy guy, so she's been forced to spend most of her time alone when she doesn't want to. Of course she'd relate to these characters who have been left alone and forgotten. I really hope this gets explored more later on. It doesn't seem like Cassie is dead, so there's a good chance she and Gregory will meet again in a future game. Obviously I'm giving this DLC a 2 out of 2 for story. How could I not? The presentation is perfect. Everything in the real world is designed to look as awful and destroyed as possible. It's the exact opposite of Security Breach, despite taking place in the same building. Then, in the AR world, everything is so surreal. They were originally going to go for a more organic look, but I'm much happier with what we got. It gives you that feeling like you've walked into a whole new world where anything can happen, which is both exciting and scary. The environments also carry a lot of weight in regards to the story. As I explained earlier, environmental clues allowed us to figure out which ending of Security Breach this follows, and it tells us way more than just that. It foreshadows both Monty and Roxy's appearances, as well as the fact that Freddy is headless. It tells us how the Mimic got trapped behind that concrete wall, and hints towards Vanny still being around. There are still new pieces of environmental storytelling being discovered here, because there's just so much of it. For example, it was somewhat recently shown that there are several references to Cassidy in the server room, one of which you can only see clearly by clipping down into the water. Presentation, easy 1 out of 1. And the total is...
Mediocre.
5 out of 10. Easter egg. I'm gonna point out one that's been making the rounds lately, and made me rethink a lot about certain plot threads. The screen in the theater has the names Greg and Jeremy faintly visible on it. This screen is playing the same GIF that plays on the TV in the Purple Man room. Make of that what you will. Number 9. FNAF World. I used to think this was a good RPG. That was before I played an actual RPG. Then I realized just how bare bones this game really is. Just look at this map, it's tiny. You can't get new skills for your characters either, so by the end of the game you need to use the overpowered ones and ignore the rest of the roster. Why have so many characters if you're gonna have to end up just using a few of them? Despite all that, this game is still pretty fun. I like how the battles are real-time instead of turn-based, because it forces you to think on your toes. And some of the moves are really creative. For example, the insta-kill is unscrew, because, you know, they're machines. And the extra life is gift boxes, as a reference to give gifts, give life. It's weird that the puppet wasn't given that skill, though. It was tough for me to pick with the gameplay, but ultimately I settled on 4 out of 7. The story here is practically non-existent. You're on a quest to stop some random thing because reasons. And if you beat it on hard mode, Scott Cawthon gets mad at you and you kill him. There's a secret route with some hidden lore, but it leads to a total nothing ending. And there are plenty of other secret endings, but none of them have any effect on the story. They mostly come out of nowhere, and then you can hop back into the game afterward like nothing ever happened. Isn't the story supposed to be the backbone of an RPG? Maybe that's why this game feels so empty. Oh wait, no, it actually is empty. But this sure didn't help hide that fact. The little that is here is pretty good at least, so I'm gonna be generous and give the story a 1 out of 2. I'm kinda torn on the visuals here. They're pretty bad, but they have a weird charm to them. It feels like something out of the 90s or 2000s, when games were still being made from rendered images of 3D models instead of real 3D. Take, for example, the first new Super Mario Bros. It has that kind of aesthetic. I think it's the way they're put together that bothers me. Nothing on the map looks natural. Assets were just placed down wherever on the grid, and there's no transition between different areas. 1 second you'll be in a grassy field, then the next you're in a forest, and then the next you're in a snow-covered land. The lower levels do look really cool though. I wish we got more stuff like this. Well, I guess the original version of the map was kinda like that. Actually, come to think of it, the old version is way better. Scott must have rushed to convert it into 3D without considering how vastly different things work with added detail and an extra dimensional plane. That must be why most of the assets are reused from his older games, and why they have clashing styles. The real standout factor here is the music. This game was our introduction to the musical artist Leon Riskin, and he did an outstanding job, not just here, but in every game he provided music for. Presentation, 0.5 out of 1. And the total is... 5.5 out of 10. I hope we get a sequel to this game someday, one with the required time put into it to make an actual full RPG. Maybe that's what the Lolbit teaser was for. Probably not, but I can dream. Easter egg. I wanted to pick the box Easter egg, but almost everyone knows about that already, so I'll have to pick something else. Freddy's nose can be honked on the main menu. I know you can honk it in most of the games, but I didn't know you could do it here until I was doing research for this video. Number 8. FNAF World Update 2. This is without a doubt the best of the joke games. There's so much variety to it. There's sure to be at least one part that any given person will like. The game consists of 4 mini-games, followed by a dungeon crawl and a final boss. There's no particular order to them, apart from the RPG part being last, so I'll just go from my least favorite minigame to my favorite one. In last place is Foxy.exe. It's a funny reference to Sonic.exe, but there's almost nothing to it. You just walk forward and occasionally stop. The only part that has actual real gameplay is the third and final stage, where you have to dodge kittens by hiding behind rocks. It's kinda like that one Mario level where you need to dodge the things that turn you into stone, whatever you call them, except a lot shorter and not as interesting. In third place is Chica's Magic Rainbow. This is a rage game, and I think it would be pretty fun if you weren't given a life limit. It's fun to have to figure out how to get to the next checkpoint, but that fun runs out when you discover that you're gonna have to start all over again after dying too many times. I know that's the point of a rage game, but, like, how does anyone like rage games? Getting angry doesn't sound like an enjoyable pastime to me. Wait a minute. Isn't that what I've been doing with all the bad reviews here? Whatever. I think a good comparison to this minigame would be Golden Strawberries and Celeste. Celeste is my favorite game of all time, because it gets so difficult, but each challenge is incredibly short, with most only taking up a single screen before it saves your place. However, once you beat the game, you can collect these special golden strawberries by beating a whole level without dying. Most people give up on these almost immediately, because they take the fun out of the game. The whole point of the game is taking risks and finding clever ways to get through screens because you're not punished for dying. Even the creator asked why anyone would actually collect them all. I never bothered to beat this minigame because neither of the characters it unlocks are necessary to beat the final boss. In second place is Freddy in Space. This is the best of the space games. It's short and sweet, with some really funny moments sprinkled in. It's also simpler than the other two. You can jump, shoot, and that's it. There aren't a bunch of extra weapons, cosmetics, and helpers to keep track of. It just takes a few simple mechanics and uses them... well, I don't want to say it uses them well exactly, since the controls are still awful, but it's less of a problem when the game is shorter and easier. I'm not sure how you're supposed to beat the final boss without taking at least a few hits, though. And finally, in first place is Foxy Fighters. This is one that Scott has repeatedly called back to as a particularly fun one to make, and it turned out really good too. It's hard to go wrong with this kind of game, and it's become apparent by this point that Scott isn't too great at making games that aren't point and click. So it was a good fit, I guess. I'm glad the idea made a return in Pizzeria Simulator, even if it was a much simpler version. The RPG section is pretty much the same as the base game. The new characters are even more overpowered than the later ones from before, though. So you can just start a new game, sneak over to the Update 2 area, unlock these guys, and cheat your way through the main campaign with them. I wish they had been given certain skills that more effectively countered the enemies in this new world, instead of just being stronger in every way. Gameplay, 4.5 out of 7. 2 points for Foxy Fighters, 1 point for Freddy in Space, 1 point for Chica's Magic Rainbow and Foxy.exe combined, and a half point for the RPG section. Unlike the base game, the story here is definitely the highlight. We learn that Scott has gone insane because FNAF World was a critical and commercial failure, and now he's locked himself in his room making terrible spin-off games. We have to go shut down the spin-offs and save the characters he pulled code from, so that they can help us get past the new security system and get into Scott's room to stop whatever he's planning. Each of the games gets some sort of reference to how dumb of an idea they are, whether that be in the game itself, from the character whose code was taken to make it, or both. My favorite example was Freddy in Space, where Scott's head in a jar sees that you're trying to deactivate the game and gets mad at you, and eventually he just starts ranting about all the other spin-offs he's gonna make after this. Once you defeat the final boss, who, of course, is the Rainbow from the Rage game, you finally get to talk to Scott. He apologizes for what he's done, but says it's too late to stop him. The lights go out, and he's killed by Baby, the main antagonist of the then-upcoming game's sister location. It turns out this entire update was actually a preemptive apology for making a real spin-off game. Now that was a funny twist. The story here was fun. It was clearly crafted with love for fans of the franchise, and I hope we get something like this again someday. Then again, we probably can't, because the whole thing required for us to feel personally connected to the creator, and now we've learned that we probably shouldn't feel that way, since... Yeah, this game definitely wouldn't work today. Oh well, story gets a 2 out of 2. The presentation in this update has the same problem as the rest of the game. It's made from a bunch of old assets mashed together, so nothing feels quite right. It's easy to tell that it was all slapped together. For some reason it's less charming here, though. I think maybe it's because I expected to see some improvement in an update that was supposed to, you know, improve the game. Also, it's easy to tell that Scott gave up on making the new characters look good. Coffee is just coffee. Mr. Chipper is just Mr. Chipper. Purple Guy is a 2D sprite, unlike the Crying Child, which got its own model. And most noticeably, the game outright admits that Nightmare BB is just the same thing with no effort put in to make him cute. I've gotta give the presentation a 0 out of 1. And the total is...
mediocre?
6.5 out of 10. We're getting there, finally. Easter egg. If you open the teaser for this game as a text document, you can find the phrase, "He put the pieces back together." This is most likely telling us that the clock route canonically happens before the update. Number 7. Ultimate Custom Night. It's kinda hard to judge the gameplay here, since it's ultimately whatever you make of it. Get it? Ultimately? Alright, I won't do that bit again. I kinda wish there had been less characters. I know that's a weird thing to say, but I have a pretty good reason, which is that there's a real quantity over quality problem here. Click Team has limitations, and also Scott needed to make it so 50-20 mode was actually possible, so each character's mechanic needed to be incredibly simple. Some only show up once per night, and a lot of characters share the exact same mechanic. Despite that, once you learn how a character works, it's easy to pick out a combination of characters that'll provide a unique challenge. Most of the presets are pretty good at this too. Plus, on the other hand, it's nice to have so many characters return in the final Click Team game. It's a grand finale in a way. Something that wouldn't have worked well in any other game but is a great choice here is the timer at the top of the screen. It kills the suspense of waiting for 6 AM, but this is more of an arcade-style game than an actual horror game. That's also why the death lines here are a much better fit than the other games that used them, those being Pizzeria Simulator and Special Delivery. This is the most replayable game by a landslide, with, from what I can calculate, 50 to the power of 20 different combinations you can choose from. And that's not accounting for secret characters. It's been many years since my high school statistics class, though, so there's a good chance I'm wrong about that. Regardless, I have more hours in this game than any of the others on the list, with it being my 4th most played game on Steam, so that's definitely gotta count for something. I think I'm gonna give the gameplay a solid 6 out of 7. There are some issues, but overall it's a solid experience. This is a lot like the original Five Nights at Freddy's, where it isn't exactly a story-based game at first glance, but if you catch some rare Easter eggs, you can start to piece together that something bigger is going on here. In fact, there's one line that pretty much gives you the answer.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us.
Combine this with the final cutscene, and it's obvious that this game is about Golden Freddy torturing William Afton in a purgatory for eternity. I'll give the story here a... Wait, what do you mean that's not what it's about? It honestly amazes me that it's possible to fumble a story this badly. I don't mean this in the same way as Security Breach, where even the creators didn't know what the story was supposed to be, but rather that there was a clear intention that came across so poorly that nobody could have possibly figured it out before it got clarified in the books. How was anyone ever supposed to figure out that the Restless Kid in Ultimate Custom Night is separate from the Restless Kid in Ultimate Custom Night? How could we have known that the big bad in the final Click Team game was some kid we've never seen before, and not the character shown twitching at the end of the game and plastered all over the place? And even if I'm wrong, and the Fazbear frights are irrelevant to the game, it still makes no sense. Why would a little girl be repeatedly referred to as he and him, and be portrayed as a photo of a little boy? And why would the toy Chica cutscenes hint at there being 7 relevant victims instead of 6? With that rant out of the way, I do still think this was a fun way of tying a random silly game into the game universe. It did a much better job of it than FNAF World. It's made relatively clear where this is, and it's not filled with nearly as many fourth wall breaks. What I'm getting at is that it commits to what it is. It doesn't try to be a non-canon spin-off and a canon game at the same time. It makes sure that everything fits into place. Because of that, I'll give the story a 1 out of 2. It's good and it's bad at the same time. This is without a doubt the worst looking game, not including the Pinky Pills ones. Some of the jump scares are simply the character shaking around in the same pose. And contrary to popular belief, this isn't due to a click team limitation, because each frame of the jump scare is a separate render, just like in all the other games. And when this isn't the case, they're so over-animated that it's funny. I can't think of a single jump scare in this game that isn't worse than the original. Except the ones who never had a jump scare before, of course. Also, whenever a character gets you, the screen shakes so much that it moves outside the border of the office image. Once you notice this, you'll never unsee it. The environment is literally just the first game, except with a prize corner and less effective lighting. I do like that you can choose what your office looks like at least, and all of them are pretty good. I just wish more of the game took place somewhere new. There's only one new character here, Dreadbear, and he looks pretty bad. He's an edited version of the Freddy model that's a real downgrade in my opinion. A bunch of little things are changed without any rhyme or reason, and it just makes him look off. You'd think he'd look something along the lines of Spring Bonnie since they're supposed to be a duo. I know he was added in at the last minute, but I'd rather not have him at all than have him looking both nothing like he logically should and just generally bad. This is an easy 0 out of 1. And the total is... 7 out of 10. Easter egg. When you go to the main menu, there's a very tiny chance that you'll hear the screaming noise from the Old Man Consequences minigame. I was the first to find this, and nobody believed me because I didn't have footage. Number 6. Five Nights at Freddy's 3. This one's gameplay has a strange history in terms of its public perception. When it first came out, people really didn't like it because it wasn't scary. Then when the 4th game came out, people suddenly loved this one and said it was scary after all, and that the 4th one tried too hard. And now it seems to be seen as... Nobody seems to really talk about it one way or the other, except the occasional hater or hardcore fan. So what do I think? I agree with the current consensus. It's not the masterpiece people once claimed it to be, nor is it a failure. It's certainly creative. While the first 2 games had you defend yourself once the animatronics got up to your door, this game lets you take somewhat of an offensive position. You can actively lure Springtrap away from you, but it's a tug-of-war against the phantoms and the errors. It starts out easy to manage, but eventually it becomes a delicate balancing act. I think the problem is that it's a bit too random to be able to consistently balance, which makes it come across as unfair sometimes. Some people claim this is the easiest game by far, and some claim that it's nearly impossible. While I'm sure that's partially related to skill, I think luck plays a part in it as well. Sometimes Springtrap will start in the place you want him, and sometimes he won't. If he's in a really bad spot at the beginning, you kinda just have to start over and hope the RNG gods will be on your side. The phantoms can be an annoyance too, because there are times where they're pretty much unavoidable. For example, the puppet gives you no time to react, and Freddy will force you not to pull down the monitor when you need to. Still, even with these problems, it's usually a fun experience. I'll give it a 5 out of 7. The story here is fantastic. At the time, it was the perfect end to the trilogy, wrapping up every important loose end. We got to face off against the killer, and if you put in the effort, you could save the children. Everything about it felt so personal. This was back when the guard was just a self-insert, so it truly felt like we were the ones saving the kids we learned to sympathize with over the past 3 games. And we were the ones to defeat the killer for good. Maybe. I don't think the cliffhanger was necessary, but it was easy to ignore at the time, so it was alright. This game also managed to incorporate its storytelling into the gameplay itself. Throughout the nights, we learn that Springtrap is intelligent, knowledgeable about the animatronics, highly persistent for seemingly no reason, and even mocking towards us sometimes. All of this hints towards the reveal at the end of Night 5 that Springtrap was the purple guy all along, which to this day is still one of the best plot twists the franchise has ever done. Or, well, it would have been if Scott hadn't spoiled it in a teaser. By the way, this game has my favorite line of dialogue in it.
In the case that the spring locks come loose while you are wearing a suit, please try to maneuver away from populated areas before bleeding out, as to not ruin the customer experience.
It's just evil enough to feel like something a horrible company would actually say. Story is a very easy 2 out of 2 here. The presentation here is the worst part of the game. Springtrap looks great, don't get me wrong, but every other character is just an old model with slightly more withering and a watermelon texture. And everything here is so overwhelmingly green. It's like I'm in a forest or something. Other games have adhered to color schemes, like blue, gray, and purple for sister location, But there's no scheme here. It's all just one particularly unpleasant shade of green. The location itself is really boring, too. This is one atrocious haunted house. Where's the scary stuff? Where are the references to the tragedy being advertised? When this place gets brought up again in the books, it's done way better. The place has jump scares, recreations of locations, and even audio of crying children in a recreation of the hallway leading to the safe room. It's such a waste to set a horror game in a haunted house and then not have it be scary in the slightest. I can't bring myself to give this one a point for presentation. And the total is... 7 out of 10. Easter egg. The minigame map has hidden vertical text spelling out "Find Me." I can't help but wonder if the secret "Come Find Me" message in the movie has any relation to this. Number 5. Curse of Dreadbear. This is another collection of minigames, so like with Help Wanted 2, I'll go through each section individually before I talk about the game as a whole. Danger Keep Out was a really fun interpretation of the Five Nights at Freddy's 1 levels. I'm glad they knew to stop after 3 nights instead of dragging it out. The way they forced you to reboot after 5 flashes was a cool diversion from the formula you'd go in expecting. And I like how you get a little bit of lenience due to the wooden boards, but that lenience gets thinner each time you rely on it. Afraid of the Dark was a mixed bag. Plush Baby was only thrown in there because Steel Wool saw that we hated them and wanted to torture us, but at least they only did it in this one level instead of spamming them everywhere like in Help Wanted 2. Pirate Ride was a great idea for a VR game, and the idea of the secret paths was brilliant. You wouldn't think that this one would be scary, but when those doors open and there's a nightmare animatronic behind them, I always jump. I can never remember which doors have them and which ones don't. Corn Maze is by far my least favorite level in the game. It takes forever because Foxy just won't leave you alone. It's especially bad if you want to get the secret ending. I never got it myself, but I've seen videos of it where it takes like an hour, and it gets progressively harder, so you could spend an hour playing this level and then have to start back from the very beginning again. That's just atrocious in my opinion. I remember when Security Breach was announced, my only hope was that it wouldn't be like this level. And then, of course, it was just like this level, except way, way, way longer. Spooky Mansion was my favorite of the sections. Hallway is, in my opinion, the most terrifying level in any of the games. This one scares me even in flat mode. It's so simple yet so effective. All you have to do is cross a hallway without bumping into the animatronics. Until Freddy shows up behind you. Then you're on a time limit, and you can't waste your time looking behind you to see how close he is. So you have to spend the whole time assuming he's right behind you, and rushing yourself into taking stupid risks. Build-A-Mangle is a really fun one. I never bother dealing with the Freddles because it's already chaotic enough without them, and it doesn't really make much of a difference whether you stop them or not. I like that you get to make a different abomination each time, and the level has a good sense of balance to it. The clock is ticking fast enough to rush you, but Mangle's presence intimidates you into taking your time, so you're constantly having to decide whether to wait and see if you really need a piece, or throw it in and risk angering Mangle. Trick or Treat is alright. It's kinda like that game where someone puts a ball under a cup and then mixes them up, except a lot slower, but also you're partially blinded. Sometimes it's just up to luck, but it's a pretty short mini-game, so it's not all that frustrating. Dreadbear's level is a lot like the arts and crafts level in Help Wanted 2. I'm not a big fan, especially since it's hard to figure out what to do. I prefer that a level is either a challenge to understand or a challenge to beat. It's a bit overkill when it tries to do both. Since I like most of the minigames here, I'm gonna give the gameplay a 6 out of 7. The only story here is a short monologue unlocked after beating the infuriatingly long route of the corn maze, and it's absolutely not worth it. It's just a teaser for Vanny, who never really does anything in the game dedicated to her, so it's a complete waste. They could have given us a story that was actually relevant to the gameplay, like something about Fall Fest or the Bite of 83. But I guess that wasn't as important as introducing Vanny's voice actress, which got changed twice between then and now. Story 0 out of 2. This DLC really commits to the Halloween theme, and I love it. Everything is bathed in orange, green, and red. And there's both old graveyard and rural farmland imagery all over the place. It feels like a step up from the main game in terms of environment. Every level design feels natural, and they're consistently spooky rather than being a mix. The sound design is top tier in this too, especially in the hallway level. I mean, just listen to this. The character models are just like in the base game. Spoilers, they aren't great. Except for the newcomers, Dreadbear and Grim Foxy. As I said before... I think I said it before? Yeah, I said it before. Steel Wool does a far better job when they create their own models than when they edit models given by Scott. But despite most of the models being mediocre... No, not those guys. I still think this deserves a full point for presentation. And the total is... 7 out of 10. Easter egg. Sometimes if you hang up the phone and danger keep out, you'll get this weird secret where the level glitches out and says it's scanning for glitches. And then you get sent back to the title screen. I assume it has something to do with Glitch Trap, but I'm not sure what the ramifications of this are. Number 4. Five Nights at Freddy's. It makes sense that the game that started it all would be towards the top of the list. If it wasn't really good, there wouldn't be so many sequels. I will admit, this game has a similar problem to the second one, where the nights drag on too long. It's not a problem in the first 3 nights, because on the first you're learning how to deal with Bonnie and Chica, the second you're learning to deal with Foxy, and the third you're learning to deal with Freddy. So it's good for things to move along slowly so the game can teach you the ropes. But on the later nights, when you've found the optimal strategy, it gets annoying to make the same few hand movements over and over for 8 minutes and 55 seconds. That's just 5 seconds shorter than the fake ending in Sister Location, which is the longest night in the series. Except for Security Breach, obviously, but you know what I mean. Still, the original Five Nights at Freddy's is perfect at building up tension. It gives you just enough information to get the general idea of what you need to do, but not nearly enough to make you confident that you'll succeed, or even that you're doing the right thing in the first place. There are some noises that function as important audio cues, but then there are other noises that mean literally nothing, and it takes a while to learn the animatronics' paths, as well as how to deal with Freddy in general. It's also great how every little action you take counts, thanks to the power consumption. Closing a door when you shouldn't, or spending too long looking for someone on the cameras, can have dire consequences. But on the other hand, if you can time your power outage just right, then you can actually increase your chance at making it through the night, since Freddy sometimes takes a while to kill you after the lights go out. It's a really cool way of adding in a gamble you can use as a last resort. Gameplay gets a 5 out of 7. There isn't much story in this one, but what is there is pretty good. I think the hidden lore might be a bit too hidden, since the vast majority of players would never see it. I think maybe the newspaper clippings should have rarely appeared in the office, instead of rarely appearing on one certain camera, since most of your time on the cameras will be spent watching Foxy at his cove or Freddy on the stage. I do like how the clippings give you just enough info to piece together what went down here without spelling it out for you. Well, I did like that until fans forgot how to put 2 and 2 together. Eventually, people started getting weird conclusions from looking too deep into these things, like there actually being 7 victims that were lured away, or the animatronics leaking blood and mucus because of agony. The blood and mucus are literally how we knew the bodies were in the suits to begin with. Story, 1.5 out of 2. I already talked about this a little in the gameplay since it's all tied together so well, but the atmosphere in this game is absolutely perfect, which was a major part of its success. The place looks worn down enough to tell you something is really wrong, without being so bad that you could just bust down a wall or something to escape. Also, whether intentionally or not, the architects here is perfectly designed to make you feel trapped and disoriented. The layout doesn't make much sense, but what you do know is that if you were able to exit the office, you'd be in one of 2 narrow hallways that an animatronic could run down to try and get you. And if you managed to make it out of the hallways, you'd end up right in the main room where all 4 animatronics would immediately see you. Another important detail is that this is the only game to feature flashing hallucinations that aren't part of a certain animatronic's mechanic. At random times, Freddy and Bonnie's faces will flash on the screen, as well as the message, "It's me." It makes the threats feel more personal, as they're messing with your head and addressing you specifically. It gives them a presence even when they're far away from you. Speaking of the characters, while their models aren't always the scariest here, the lighting and posing do a lot of heavy lifting to make them menacing and even downright disturbing at times. For example, if you look at Freddy's model on its own, it just looks kinda silly. But whenever you see him in the game itself, he looks like a powerful threat. This game is the perfect example of why presentation is important enough to warrant a point in the ranking scale. If this game were presented in any different way, it would be a shell of its current self. Presentation, 1 out of 1. I wanted to cheat and give it 2 out of 1, but then my credibility goes down the toilet. Although that implies that I have credibility to begin with, which is debatable. And the total is 7.5 out of 10. Easter egg. Every character has an "it's me" hallucination associated with them, except for Chica. The word flickers on the screen when Golden Freddy appears. Freddy and Bonnie appear during the main "it's me" hallucination and the Golden Freddy one. And sometimes when Foxy leaves Pirate Cove, the sign will change to say "it's me." I guess the "it's me's" that appear in the East Hall could be Chica's, but Freddy can also appear in that hallway, so probably not. Number 3. Five Nights at Freddy's 4. This is the scariest non-VR game of them all. Scott went all in with the horror on this one as a reaction to criticism of the 3rd game, and it certainly shows. It takes what worked about the first game and pushes it to the extreme. Instead of pressing a button to shut the doors on Bonnie and Chica, you have to run up to the door. Then, you have to choose whether to close the door or shine the flashlight. If you shine the light and someone's there, you see that they were right in your face the entire time and get killed. If you close the door and someone isn't there, then they'll walk up to the door and prepare to attack once you leave. And instead of checking on Pirate Cove and cam stalling Freddy, you have to run right up to those guys to check on them too. The gameplay is designed to make you fight your natural instincts at every single moment. Every time danger is coming, you're forced to move towards it. This is the first game to really force you to rely on audio cues, and it's incredibly effective. The difference between life and death is listening to find out if an animatronic is close enough to breathe right into your ear. Don't question how they breathe, it's dream logic. This is also the first game, and one of the only games, to feature a final boss. Well, technically there are two, but they're the same thing, just with different colors. I love that on night 5, right when you've mastered the gameplay loop and would start to get bored of it in the previous games, you're thrown into a completely different situation with a character who follows his own rules. You have to relearn everything to beat him. I think this is also the only game to add a mini-game that can help you in the main gameplay too. It was a smart choice, and it's great that you can access it in the menu once you beat the game. Despite looking at first glance like a copy of the original game, there's just so much unique stuff here. Another thing worth pointing out is that this is a much slower-paced game than the ones before it, which is something Scott pointed out upon the game's release. Because of that, you're not constantly going through the same loop every 2 seconds. You can play in a loop if you want, and it's probably the smartest option if you want to win consistently. But each time you go through the loop, it takes about 15 to 30 seconds depending on how much you're dealing with. The nights are 6 minutes long, so that's like 12 to 24 loops per night. It's a lot less tiring that way. The only complaint I have here is that the jump scare sound is way too loud. You have to turn your volume up all the way in order to hear the breathing, which causes the jump scare noise to blow your eardrums out. I actually downloaded a volume equalizer to cheat at this one, and I've put one on every computer I've used since then, and always leave it on because it's so convenient for a headphone user like me. I never have to worry about videos randomly deciding to be super loud again. And no, this isn't a paid advertisement for SoundLoft. That would be really weird anyway since it's free. With only one criticism that's easy to work around, I have to give this game a 6 out of 7. If it had more replayability, I probably wouldn't have even knocked off the 1 point. The story here is good on a surface level, but falls apart when you try to connect it to the other games. I wish it had either been completely self-contained or tied itself intrinsically to the plot of the first 3 games, because the weird gray area it puts itself in makes it so hard to interpret. That's what led to the dreaded dream theory. All the references to past games makes it seem like you're supposed to connect the stories together, but it just doesn't work most of the time unless you put a heavily symbolic twist on it. For example, there's clearly meant to be a connection between the crying child and the puppet. There are obvious visual similarities, and they care for the same characters in a symbolic sense. Even the crying child's final pose is lifted straight from a sprite of the puppet. But does this ever go anywhere? Of course not. Another good example is the Mangle toy. How does it exist in 1983? What's the point of it? Is it foreshadowing? If it is, what is it foreshadowing for? I don't think I need to go on. Most of you are probably already aware of how incomprehensible this story is on a grander scale. Even with those problems, though, I still really like it. It's a good origin story for Mike, and I can't really blame this game for the other game's inability to use it to their advantage. Or, acknowledge it. It feels unfinished, though. It's got a cliffhanger ending, and Scott decided not to give us a resolution because we weren't able to figure out what the resolution was supposed to be. What kind of backwards logic is that? This may be hard to believe with how I keep jumping back into criticism, but this was the first game to make me invested in the story. I was first introduced to the franchise about a month after the second game was released, but the hidden lore wasn't all too important to me. I just liked that it was about animatronics. When I was a kid, I collected those little animatronic plushes, especially rabbit-themed ones, and yet sometimes they would still scare me even though I liked them. so of course these games would appeal to me. But once I played the 4th game, I became obsessed with figuring out what it all meant, and that obsession never ended. I guess you could say the story changed my life, for better or for worse. Probably worse. But I guess you never know. I could have, died in a car accident if I never played this game. Changing the past is weird like that. Maybe I'm biased here, but I'm gonna give this one a 1 out of 2. I spend most of the time complaining, but a lot of those complaints were technically directed toward the other games. Just like the original, this game has the perfect atmosphere. I imagine that was intentional, because this game has an incredibly similar layout to the first game. It takes everything that made that one work, and makes it feel incredibly personal. Now they're in a domestic setting. As the tagline for the game says, this time the terror has followed you home. Your player character didn't choose to come here. You can't dismiss the protagonist as deserving this because they were stupid enough to come back. This is in their mind. What are they supposed to do? Just not sleep? The house itself feels familiar but wrong. It's like a small-scale model of a child's bedroom, but full size, if that makes sense. It just gives you the feeling that something is horribly wrong. It perfectly portrays that kind of twisted nostalgia that this franchise's premise is based on. The characters follow the same principle I talked about with the first game, where they're silly out of context, but perfect in their intended environment. I mean, just compare these two images. They're both literally and figuratively night and day. Most of the time, the animatronics are too deep in the shadows to fully see, and when you do get to see them up close, it's only for a second, so your brain has to fill in a lot of the blanks, unlike those awful Pizzeria Simulator jump scares that stay on the screen forever. And it's not like every other game where you can just stare at the animatronics as they approach you. Oh, and this game has my favorite menu. I can't play it for copyright reasons, but if you haven't listened to it yourself yet, you should really do that. It's just so creepy. I've seen a few other people point this out too in YouTube videos. 1 out of 1 for presentation, definitely. And the total is 8 out of 10. Very rarely do I rank a game 8 or above, so this one and the next 2 after it are being given a high honor by my standards. Easter egg. If you stare at the bed for 15 seconds, Nightmare Foxy will attack you regardless of whether he's in the closet, or even active for the night. It even happens on night 5, when Dreadbear is the only antagonist. Number 1, Help Wanted. This was a shoo-in for first place. Wait, we're at number 2 right now? Oh, okay then. It takes the majority of the games before it and puts them in virtual reality, and it adds new minigames on top of that. What more could you ask for? Once again, I'm gonna go through each section of this game separately. The FNAF 1 remake needed to switch some stuff up in order to work in VR. Mainly it's the functionality of the monitor. It takes up the whole screen in the first game, so animatronics could sneak in while you had it up. That obviously won't work here, so instead, they make it so the monitor is always on and it doesn't take up any power. Instead, the doors take up more power than they did in the original. Also, watching Foxy doesn't stop him. If it did, you'd be able to stay on Pirate Cove the whole night and he'd never move. You really don't need to watch him at all in this version if you have quick reflexes, because you can hear him running toward the door. Instead, you'll want to watch Freddy, because you can still cam stall him here, at least from what I can tell. It's a bit simpler than the original, but since this game has so many different modes, I don't think that's too much of a problem. Oh, and the nights are shorter, which is a plus. The nights in the FNAF 2 remake are also much shorter, and with how chaotic this game got, that's definitely for the best. They're 5 minutes and 14 seconds long here, compared to the original length of 7 minutes, so they don't drag on nearly as much. Foxy is also not a problem anymore, because whenever he's there, he actually shows up. The toy animatronics are way more intimidating here. I didn't expect them to be so big. It's kinda sad that the withered animatronics only get one night and it was an update, though. Also, they never fixed the glitch where two Freddy variants both stand in the same place. That would be so easy to fix. How is it still there? FNAF 3 definitely got the worst remake. It feels so much clunkier. Springtrap responds much more slowly. The Phantoms kinda just do whatever they want most of the time. And some of the Phantoms aren't even there. Only Balloon Boy, Mangle, and Foxy were added for some strange reason. You can usually tell when Springtrap is about to get you, since you can see into the vent, so there's far less tension there. Dark Rooms is a mix of remakes and new stuff. First, it adapts the two Fun With minigames. They're exactly the same as they were in Five Nights at Freddy's 4, but they're way more fun in VR. You're scaled down to child size, so even though the characters are little, they still feel like real threats. Then there's Fun with Plush Baby, which is an incredibly frustrating level. It's still pretty fun though, actually. It just drags on for too long. And finally, there's a remake of Funtime Foxy's minigame in Sister Location. Scott said before the game was released that this level was way scarier in VR, and he was right. Actually being there makes this so much more tense, especially when you shine the light and discover that Funtime Foxy is just inches away from your face. Parts and service was a major part of the advertising for this game, and it's easy to see why. These minigames are all brilliant. You have to get right up in the animatronics' faces, and one small mistake can mean instant death. It's kinda like a game of Operation, except the punishment is a jump scare instead of a buzzing noise. My favorite of the four is Freddy's. He felt the most threatening of them, thanks to the scripted moment where you break his music box. It's surprisingly rare for him to get something special like that. Also, that minigame has one of my favorite jokes, where you're told to place a kid's hat in the Lost and Found, but it's actually the trash bin from the Chica level. It was cool that they gave a reason that Foxy was out of order too, and I love the way they adapted his ability to run into leg tremors, as well as making use of his hook for once. After that is vent repair, another genius idea. Here you're stuck in small vent systems and forced to fix stuff while fending off creepy crawly animatronics. The first one with Mangle is exactly what Pizzeria Simulator should have been. You have to deal with a task while also using your flashlight to scare Mangle away from you. It's got the same setup, but you actually get to see the animatronic and you can deal with them quickly without having to restart any of your tasks. Ennard's level is the scariest one in the base game. Every time you complete a task, you get sent further away from the surface where you want to be. It feels like you're just making things worse for yourself, but you have no other option. The way Ennard jumps around freaks me out too. 1 second he'll be behind you, and then the next he'll be right up in your face. The only thing I didn't like here was that Ennard got 2 scripted jump scares, which is really cheap. Finally, we have Night Terrors. This one has some new levels using the FNAF 4 bedroom as the setting, but also recreations of the Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmarian boss fights. These were all pretty good. My favorite is the Nightmarian one. They made the setting more unique by busting it up, and the tentacles are really creepy. This was a major improvement over the original. All of these are horrifying though. The animatronics are all so huge compared to the player, and when an animatronic at the doorway is up in your face, they're literally up in your face. And of course, there's Pizza Party. This one was scary in a different way from all the others. It shows a twisted recreation of the missing children incident, with you playing the role of one of the kids who were killed. Seeing Spring Bonnie dancing around at the end after you discover that you've been killed and stuffed into Freddy is chilling. The moment gets almost immediately undercut by Hand Unit though, sadly. Overall, the gameplay here is fantastic, and it took the franchise to a whole new level, and literally to a whole new dimension. 7 out of 7. I like how the story is basically a video game creepypasta. It was fun listening to the development of the in-universe game, because it blurred the line between the game world and the real world, which made things a lot more unsettling. It also kind of played into the whole Five Nights at Freddy's is real thing that was prevalent among the community in the older days, which was pretty cool for someone who was around back then. The downside, though, is that this game opened up a massive can of worms in regards to the game series' overarching narrative. Suddenly, everything from the past is part of an in-universe Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, but actually everything did still happen, and the in-universe games are recreations of the events we saw in the real games, but they're still indistinguishable. Scott Cawthon explained that he only did this so that questionably canon characters could show up in a canon game, but he already managed to do that with Ultimate Custom Night, so there was never any real need for this plot thread to be created. It kinda makes it hard to discern what's a joke about Fazbear Entertainment's greed, and what's legitimate product placement, which makes me a little uncomfortable sometimes. This isn't something that we can just ignore the ramifications of either, because the indie game plot is the basis for everything that comes after this game. I suppose it does suit the current arc's theme of mimicking, but I'm sure there were less convoluted ways that it could have been incorporated. Story, 1 out of 2. It's got its pros and cons. The models are reasonable, considering the hardware limitations of the time. They all vary from okay to pretty good, except for Springtrap, who's terrible, and Glitchtrap, who's one of my favorite models in the franchise. Sometimes the low quality actually makes the levels creepier, though. Some of them take place in a void, and it feels so surreal, like you've been dropped in the middle of nowhere with no way to escape. Most of the levels in the sequel felt tamer, because the environment you were in felt safer. Presentation, 0.5 out of 1. And the total is 8.5 out of 10. Easter egg. One of the boxes at the prize counter has a hidden QR code on it. When you scan it, you get the message, "Ship to where it must go. You will know." Number 1. Sister Location Custom Night. Trust me, I'm just as surprised as you are. I knew this was gonna rank pretty high, but I wasn't at all expecting it to get more points than any other game. I thought for sure that Help Wanted would get that spot. But once I kept thinking on it, it just made sense. The gameplay here is so much fun. It finally masters the sit and survive gameplay. There are 10 threats, and each one works differently. That's enough to make things hectic, but not so much that you can't even think. It's exactly what the second game should have been. This is also the first sit and survive game to incorporate keyboard controls. This was a genius idea, as it makes the fast-paced modes flow much easier, and prevents the hand cramps that the first and second game would cause when you had to repeatedly flick your wrist to pull up the monitor. There's a mix of familiar mechanics and fun and new ideas here. Yendo is basically just Golden Freddy, and Funtime Foxy is the same as Classic Foxy, so you can already understand some of the basics when you begin. But then there's stuff like Ballora, where you have to listen for her music and close the door at the side she's on, and Funtime Freddy, where you have to keep track of where he is when he launches Bon Bon. But probably my favorite part is that 4 of the 5 cameras in the game are absolutely required. In every other game, you can get away with using just 1 or 2 cameras. Here, aside from the vent cam with Biddy Bab that you never have to use because you can just rely on her sound cues, you have no choice but to switch between all the cameras and interact with different things on them. It's proper utilization of the game's potential, which admittedly is a low bar for a video game, but hey, it only took Scott 5 games and 2 DLCs to figure it out. The character roster is mostly good. I like how both of the Easter egg characters from the main game made it in, and it was nice that they were all given a mechanic that suits their personality. Biddy Bab is sneaky, Funtime Freddy is obnoxious, Ballora is graceful, and so on. I wish Baby had been here instead of a second Biddy Bab or a second set of Minarinas. But she was never one to cause problems if she's not getting anything out of it, so I guess I can understand why she wasn't added. The only other gameplay issue I have is a semantic one. Despite this being called a custom night, you can't set the AI yourself. You have to go by the presets. A lot of people complained about this when it was released, and I imagine it would have been an easy issue to fix, so I don't know why it still doesn't have that option. Gameplay, 7 out of 7. The story here has its ups and downs. The speech from Michael is by far my favorite in the series, and Scott has always been good with monologues, so that's a massive compliment. The mini-games are really silly though, not to mention confusing. We really didn't need a second purple guy, with only one of them being literal. How were we expected to understand that? It's clearly meant to be a double twist. First making us think the player and sister location was actually William instead of Mike like it said, but then revealing that no, it actually was Mike. But it's too vague to get that across. I don't blame people for hearing they didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you, and completely misinterpreting it as referring to the Follow Me minigames. None of the animatronics ever imply they think Mike is William, except Baby in the fake ending, but that never really happened, so Mike wouldn't know about it. And what does "I put her back together" even mean? I know I said the speech was cool, but it shouldn't have been the backbone of the story. Way too much of it is told through this 1 minute of dialogue when it should have been shown to us. Why couldn't we have gotten mini-games of putting Elizabeth back together instead of so many of the same cutscene where Michael walks down the street? Why couldn't the gameplay have pulled an Ultimate Custom Night where it's taking place in the player's mind while they're being kept alive? That way the dialogue could have given implications of the animatronics mistaking Mike for William. Story, 1 out of 2. The private room was always my favorite area in Sister Location, because it adds a dash of that sci-fi feeling without detracting from the dingy aesthetic the games are known for, so I'm glad it was chosen as the location for this game. There isn't really much else to say here. It's the same characters in one of the same locations from the base game. Same angles and lighting too. The new music was a nice touch. And hey, they always say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'll give it a 1 out of 1, just like Sister Location. And the total is 9 out of 10. Easter egg. I don't think this game has any Easter eggs. And I guess that about wraps it up. Maybe now I'll go back to making short videos again. And let me know your favorite and least favorite of the Five Nights at Freddy's games. There are a lot less here than books, so you could probably even make your own list of worst to best in the comments if you wanted to. I'd like to read it.